TTIP announced as this great idea, this great agreement that was going to generate growth and jobs in an economy that, as we all know, has none. It was, there are lots of figures bandied about. How seriously you take them, I guess, is a question. But it was going to be a big boost for employment and for getting the economies moving again. But at least the impression from the outside that I have and others I talk to have is it seems to be running into the sand to some extent. And I'd like sort of this debate to bring out what the main issues are, why it might be running into the sand, whether it should run into the sand, and then open it up as quickly as we can to the audience. In the first place, I'll privilege journalists. So if you've got a yellow badge, you'll get called upon before other people who don't have yellow badges. And then we're going to broaden it out. And I don't want it to be like lots of long, boring presentations like the one I'm just making, but really quite pithy, dynamic debate. So let's hope that's what happens. So I'm going to start off in the order of the program and by calling on Markus Beyrer, who's the Director General of Business Europe, to make 3 or 4 major points. Markus.
Well, thank you, Stephen. Well, first of all, good evening. Thank you for joining. Well, we certainly had a good debate already, but be assured we said nothing on the Queen, so I think we're on the safe side. Well, I mean, first, and this is an obvious argument, and you stressed it, but I think it's still the most important one. Growth is rather weak in Europe. Growth is majorly happening outside Europe, so there's a lot of homework we will have to do, and I think we have a good chance to do it with the new institutions. Which is about doing the right structural reforms and also generating more investment. So this is very important, but this is not what we are talking about today. What we also need to do, of course, is to open up new markets for the European business and for the European economy. And there, even so, there is diverging views on the size of the positive impacts. It is very clear, and there's all studies, everybody is suggesting that TTIP will have a positive effect on jobs and growth. And I think this is the most important thing we should keep in mind. And of course, I am happy to have all these debates on whether the size is underestimated or whatsoever. But I think it is very clear that this is the best possibility we've got to scale up growth and jobs. And all relevant studies suggest this. Number 2, looking at the debate, and we already had part of it, and there will be aspects we will discuss later on. But I think many of the arguments against TTIP, if you look at it very closely, are more or less a general critique towards globalization. And looking at this, I mean, I think we should be very clear that globalization is happening and will continue to happen. And again, I think TTIP, in the sense of sharing forces transatlantically, is an excellent opportunity to shape globalization according to our values, and I'm not afraid to say Western values, because there's nothing bad about Western values. On the contrary, and we've seen that history is not over, and there's different concepts in the world, and I think we have a much better chance to have our model, how we see things, prevail if we share forces. And looking at Europe and the US at the transatlantic marketplace from a global perspective, there's much more which unites us than what separates us. What separates us, we are about to discuss it, and we have to discuss it. And the third point I wanted to make, certainly TTIP will be positive for all sizes of companies and businesses, and as a consequence also for employees and consumers, as we see it. Will there be only winners and no losers? No. Will the ratio be better than normally? The answer is a clear yes. And I think I've never seen an agreement, an FTA agreement or FTA and investment agreement like we have it here, where our constituency, our members were so united standing behind us, because normally you would have those who are more pushy and those who have more defensive interest. In this case, all our constituencies, all companies, all sectors are very much standing behind this agreement, very much standing behind the approach to reach this agreement, and I think this is a very clear sign that here is a lot to gain. But having talked about all sizes of companies, I think we have to be very clear that those who have most to gain is the SMEs. because there's a lot of things which are in TTIP which could be extremely positive for small and medium-sized companies. Number one, there is still tariff peaks with a specific SME relevance. This goes for textiles, this goes for processed foods. But much more than this, there is a lot of things where the cost of compliance, the cost of entry to these transatlantic marketplaces are higher for SMEs than they are for other companies. This goes for technical specifications, this goes for procedures, this goes for licensing measures, and so on and so on. And this is where we also need to harvest the benefit. Because being Austrian, being an Austrian national, I think I know very well that at the end what makes your economy really successful is competitive medium-sized companies with the possibility to see the world as their marketplace. Very often companies nobody knows, but this is what makes the difference at the end of the day. And this is why I also think we will need successful SMEs in the world, and there the transatlantic marketplace is a very logic next step. And this can be used as a training field, as a springboard to make medium-sized companies ready for global markets. So to sum it up, and what have you said about why things are going to the sand or not? I think first it's much too early to tell because I mean we are about a year of negotiations now, and I think no consistent agreement has ever been negotiated below 2.5 years. So I think next year will be a decisive year. And second, we cannot allow for this to go to the sands for the reasons I have stressed, but there's much more reasons to this. We need to make it a success. We need to aim for an ambitious agreement, and we can absolutely not allow to waste this opportunity. Thank you, Stephen, at this point.
Thank you, Markus. So more winners than losers, you said, but you seem to be suggesting among companies. Are you saying more winners than losers among societies in Europe?
No, overall, I think it will have a positive effect for all groups. But when I was talking about more winners than ever, I was, of course, first of all talking about my constituency. And as I said, normally you have different sectors, different groups saying, okay, we are more in favor and others have a more defensive approach. This time, this is very unified. And I think this is a very clear sign that this time there's much more to gain than there would be in many other agreements we could consider.
Thank you. Now I'm calling upon Bernadette Ségol, who's Secretary General of the European Trade Union Confederation, who might have a slightly different take on it.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks to Business Europe for these debates. Indeed, we are convinced that discussions around TTIP have to leave the corridors of the Commission and where they are behind closed doors. And it's very much necessary to have this type of public debates and have the public debates, but also have them influence the negotiation. That's no need to tell you that there is mounting concerns in Europe amongst workers, among citizens, that European standards, the regulatory process, democratic governance would be undermined by TTIP, that these concerns have an impact on politics, and that many populist groups are jumping on this bandwagon. We've seen that in many countries. Well, the ETUC is one of the groups that can be called moderate. We can say yes, but yes if. And that's the if, which is very important. And if the if is not implemented, then it will be no. We have an agreement with the American trade union, AFL-CIO, on what we demand from this agreement, this trade deal between the EU and US. We want workers' rights to be respected, quality jobs, public services to be upheld, democratic decision-making, and international convention to be implemented. So basically, an agreement between the EU and US should serve the public interest, not simply vested interest. And the gains should be we cannot privatize the gains and socialize the losses, and I can develop that if I have time later on. The question of transparency is very important, the impression that negotiators are doing their things in the corridors and that what we are saying is absolutely not listened to. That would have a terrible consequence at the end, because there would be a massive campaign against that deal. Now, the ETUC, of course, wants to create not only jobs, but decent jobs, good jobs. And okay, Markus is saying, oh, you're going to have that. Now, you know, I like Markus very much, but, you know, how can you prove that we're going to have that? So many companies have been telling us, you're going to get good jobs if we invest in your country, and we didn't get that. So it's just, we have no evidence about the jobs, the type of jobs, where, in which region, in which sector, who are going to be the losers, who are going to be the winners, and what is being done for those who might be losing from this agreement. Then it's very important for us that public services should be respected. We don't want public services to be affected by this agreement. It's also a very, very strong point for us. We are not against the lowering of tariffs. They might have an effect. I mean, we don't know, once again, how much this effect would be. We are not against diminishing the barriers that exist, so long as these barriers are technical. And that is the problem for us. Where is the limit between the technical barriers and what is going to impinge on what we call collective preferences? For us, it is social Europe, is the social model we have in Europe. Very important for us are the implementation of labor standards. There are core labor standards in the ILO. They are not extraordinary. It's the right of association, the right to negotiate, basic workers' rights, which are recognized internationally. And these rights should be included in an agreement and should be implemented not only at the federal level, but at the level of the various states in the US. And by the way, this is not a demand from a trade union. It was the demand of President Sarkozy, who is not necessarily our favorite partner, in 2009 when he spoke to the ILO convention, include core labor standards of the ILO in trade deals, with way of enforcing these standards. Now, I've said a number of things, and we were for, but there is one thing we are against. Very clearly, we are against the ISDS. We are against
which is ISDS?
Investor-state dispute settlements. Thank you very much, Markus. Yes, well, we've been juggling with initials so often. So we are against it, and we are against ISDS because we are convinced that foreign investors should not have a different treatment than and special protection than the local investors. Why is it that the government's rules, the rules that exist at national level, should not be applied to foreign investors between two big democratic blocs like the EU and US? We've had some sort of success when we heard that the Commission was going to suspend the negotiations on ISDS during 3 months when we had this consultation. There were 150,000 answers, most of them against ISDS, but the message we get is that nevertheless, you know, whatever you say, we're going to continue with ISDS. And it is a very strong momentum. The momentum is very strong in Germany. and Germany is not an anti-trade country. The momentum is enormous in the UK, and UK depends on trade. It's very big in France. So this opposition has to be taken extremely seriously and discussed really. Why do we need an ISDS? I haven't got, between US and EU, I haven't got a satisfactory answer, except that it would be easier for the investors to invest and get money if there was a problem. So that is a very important point for us. So to summarize, our priorities are labor standards to be implemented, public services to be respected, ISDS to be excluded, and if business was going to listen to us on these 3 points, then we can certainly discuss further and reach an agreement. If we are not listened to, then there will be big problems, and from a moderate organization that we are and ready to discuss and certainly open to that sort of discussion, we would have to campaign very strongly at the end of the deal if these points were not respected. One point I haven't replied to, you said, I mean, where is this thing going? Is it going to the wall or to the sand? I think you said. Is it approximately the same? Maybe. Now, I know that Mr. de Geert had the objective to finish the negotiation by the end of this year. This is a bit of Belgian surrealism. I would say that in French. Probably Mrs. Malmström will be more realistic on this issue. I have met recently the presidency of the council, the trade minister from Italy on that, Carlo Calenda, and as well as the chair of the committee in the Bernd Lange in the parliament, and they are more now advocating a more restricted agenda for TTIP. So this might be the way we are going, despite the will of the two parties. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very brief. I have one brief question. You've gone over your 6 minutes, I'm absolutely sure. But public services to be affected, you don't want that to happen. Just expand in 2 or 3 sentences how TTIP might affect public services.
If you take UK, for instance, you might be forced to liberalize more the NHS, or you might have sectors which are considered as public sectors in some countries, which should be challenged by the US as being a sector where they can liberalize. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we've had a business view, we've had a labor view. How about a view from consumers? So I'm going to ask Monique Goyen, Director General of the European Consumer Association.
Thank you very much. Good evening. So I'm representing the European Consumer Organization, 40 consumer organizations in 31 European countries, and I can say a little bit like Bernadette, we consider ourselves as quite a moderate NGO. You know, when you look at the let's say the press or the media coverage about TTIP, you see the NGOs fighting against TTIP, but I think it's the NGOs in Europe are not a monolithic bloc against TTIP, and we consider that a trade agreement can be good for consumers because they can deliver more choice, lower prices, and it can also put pressure on innovation. So we are, in principle, in favor of a trade agreement. Whether we are in favor of TTIP remains to be seen, because we don't yet know what's in TTIP. We have some issues, but that's later. So we are not part of the no TTIP movement here in Europe, and we also we consider to be our job. It is not my job to create jobs or growth. My job as a consumer representative is to maximize the consumer benefit that can come out of TTIP and to minimize consumer detriment that could flow from TTIP. And that's very important. That's my job. There are other respectable jobs for workers, for industry, and for the environment. And in what we see around the TTIP negotiations and the information that we have is that there is a risk that the standards that currently are applicable to consumer protection and other areas of protection could be lowered. And now it's also very, very important that you do not consider this to be a United States versus Europe debate, because we are not like Europe is the best place to be for a consumer. We work together with our US colleagues in the context of the TACD, some of you know the Transatlantic Consumer Dialogue, and we have quite aligned positions about US and EU consumers wanting to have the same safety standards, or safety or quality standards when it comes to consumer products and services and consumer interests. And so we are quite aligned, and we think that both US and EU can learn quite a lot from each other when it comes to consumer welfare or consumer well-being, and TTIP could be the opportunity to raise those standards. We are worried that it would be the other way around. Why? Because in fact, what worries us, and Bernadette also has already touched about it, is we don't really know what's in there. And we see that now I'm speaking from the European side, and just for you to know, I'm part of the advisory group together with Louisa and Pascal, I think is also there. Even if we have a little bit more advanced information, but still there is not a lot that we see, and we see that DG Trade and the institutions manage TTIP as a normal trade agreement. But what we see coming out of it and around it is that it's not business as usual. It's not business as usual. It's much more than a trade agreement. It goes far beyond. It goes into regulatory cooperation. They call it convergence, coherence, whatever. But what is in it there, or what can be in it, is that there will be much more cooperation between the legislators and between regulatory agencies on both sides of the Atlantic. Now, why not? This can be good, for sure. This can be good for consumers, this can be good for business, this can be good for everybody, because you can also have exchange of information, exchange of best practices, and this is something that we as consumers welcome. But it could also lead to delay in adopting regulation or to watering down standards. And I have a list of sectors where we are concerned. I'm not going into that to respect more or less my 5, 6, 7 minutes. And also because due to this regulatory cooperation, there is this notion of living agreement, so that after the agreement has been signed and ratified and implemented, there is this living agreement afterwards where not necessarily all the democratic safeguards are being put in place. Now, and I think that even Markus mentioned it in his introduction, this is not a trade agreement, this is more the first step towards a transatlantic single marketplace. Now, why not? Can be good for everybody.
You added the single.
Sorry? Yeah, okay, I added a single market, okay? So we are complementary, Markus. But for us, it's not why not? But then this negotiation and these discussions should take place not according to the trade rules, but to normal negotiation, interinstitutional input, because there it's a total change. It's not just trade, it's not eliminating customs or tariffs, and all market access is much more important. And that's why we believe that there is a democratic deficit. If we go much more into regulatory cooperation, we need much more input by those who are elected by the European citizens. And therefore we are very much worried about the lack of transparency. And this is, now you have heard it, this can be like a redundant sentence, but we don't really know what's in and what's out the trade agreement. We don't really know what will be the impact. And what we say as BEUC, as an NGO, is that what's secret is suspect. Why do you need to keep this secret? Why don't you open up the text? And as long as it's secret, as an NGO, and as a stakeholder who could provide meaningful input to the negotiations, we must work according to the worst case scenario. As long as we are not allowed to have access to what's being negotiated, we have to be negative. We have to be scaremongering. And that's the real risk behind, and like Bernadette also said, the real risk behind this is that, and it's starting, and it's not starting, it's developing, there is a mobilization of public opinion against TTIP without knowing what's in TTIP. And that would lead to a failure. And that would lead to a failure for the bad reasons, just because people don't know what's in it. And I really think that it would be a total waste of resources. I said to somebody in DigiTrade that DigiTrade, if there would be this collapse, let's say, or this veto to TTIP, DigiTrade would go into collective therapy. You know, they spend how many years in their lives in order to make it work, and then it will collapse for the wrong reasons. While therefore, we really plead that there should be much more sharing. I don't ask for the public having access at every moment online, 24 hours every day to the exact state of the negotiations, but to have access at certain stages, like it happens in other multilateral trade institutions like WTO, WIPO, but at least that those institutions that are part of the institutional system in Europe, and in the US that's their problem, but in Europe, like be it the Parliament, be it the Council, be it the Trade Policy Council, be it the advisory group, have a meaningful access to the document, and as Bernadette, to the documents, to the texts, to the offers, and, as Bernadette said, and have a meaningful input. Not only should we be able to be informed, but we should be able to provide feedback, because we can contribute and improve. Because for the moment, it's only the Commission negotiating officially without any feedback from any other party in the institutional system. And we believe that TTIP would have a lot to win to be more open for everybody, to be more open, to be more inclusive of different stakeholders and institutional interests, and then it would have a chance of not failing, because then there would be a discussion on the merits and not on the secrecy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, maybe I think there are some people from the Commission here. I mean, perhaps later they could explain why there isn't more transparency in the negotiating process. I suppose there might be an argument to say it's like playing poker with your cards on the table, but I'm not sure that would apply. But anyway, perhaps somebody can address it.
This is not a poker game. This is a trade agreement which will provide a change in the regulatory framework of almost 1 billion people. So I think it would deserve a little bit more transparency.
On the question of consumer regulation, I mean, there is a sort of a European approach that one's heard over the years, which is called the precautionary principle, which is not an approach that the US takes. I mean, is it, on the whole, is this something that's compatible? The European approach, which is coming from one direction, and the US approach another direction. Is it really possible to get these two things together, you think, in principle?
Well, by the way, precautionary principle is also applied in the United States, but they call it differently. But that's, well, I think that the problem is, what would you expect to do? So does that mean that we have, I mean, everybody does on their territory what they want to do. Now, the question is, what do you accept coming into your own system? So should we give up the precautionary principle, which we consider for many, many reasons to be the most adequate approach towards risk assessment and risk management? Should we give it up in order to please the United States? This is something, I mean, we should have this, we really look rather like, this for us would be a reduction of our standards, and this would be a no-go. Reduction of standards should not apply to, should not be a consequence of TTIP. And the problem is, of course, Mr. de Gucht and his colleagues say no lowering of standards. You know, that's the, no standards will be lowered. But through the regulatory cooperation and through the principle of mutual recognition, in fact, it is a reduction, a potential reduction of standards.
Thank you. I'm going to call on now Karl Martin Welker, who's Vice President of the German Engineering Association, called VDMA. And actually, there's some 3,100 enterprises in that association. I think the medium enterprise is pretty small. And one's heard a lot of criticism of TTIP as being sort of, you know, a deal for big business. It'd be kind of interesting to hear why it might be a positive for small businesses, in your view.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good evening. I'm probably the only one not very familiar with the European processes here in Brussels, but I think I can help a little bit to calm the concerns of Mrs. Guyen and Mrs. Ségol regarding what does that agreement bring to us? Let me first introduce my my main profession. I'm an entrepreneur of a mid-sized German machine tool builder. We employ almost 600 people in Cologne and worldwide about 750, having a big foot in the American market. And we are probably the typical example of the German Mittelstand, which is now kind of in the main focus of all European nations as being successful. We have a strong export. More than 50% of my products go abroad. And as I said, America is our most important export market outside of Europe. Aside of that, I'm representing the VDMA, the German Engineering or the Machine Tool Association, with about 3,100 companies, 1 million employees, 206 billion euro turnover. Of the companies in that association, 86% are small and medium-sized business, and they still, even being small, they have a 76% export rate, with about 56% of this export rate being outside of the EU. Why does this agreement, or why does America matter to us? It is the second most important market for our sector, with 14 billion euro. And it is a big company, a big country where we have invested a lot of money. Right now, we count about 7.6 billion being invested from our companies in the US. What is a problem I have? Pretty much all our companies have. Yes, the tariff of 4%, but I would agree that is not the main issue. The main issue is the non-tariff barriers, and this is regarding the technical regulations we have there, and it is regarding the certification systems we have there. I give you an example. We are on my machines, probably 80%, 85% of all spark plugs in the world are done on my machines. Not so in America. Why not? Because the regulations there are so tough and so difficult, it's actually file after file after file, that we gave up to study all of that because it became so expensive that we said we'd rather drop the American market on that thing. So we deliver to Japan, to Korea, to Germany, to Italy, to wherever you want to, but we don't to the US because it's just too expensive to follow all their regulations. And I can give you many, many of these examples, and they ramp up between 5% and 20%, depending on what of our members we are asking, what are the hurdles to overcome to be successful in America. The hurdle is not the tariffs. The hurdle is the non-tariff barriers. And yes, we have to work on that. And if we would accept that a grounding cable in the European Union, CE norm, is green and yellow, and yes, it is red in the US. I don't know why it has to be red, but it is red. If we could live with that, it would help us tremendously. Does it make the product better or worse? No, it doesn't. It doesn't change anything. It's the same thing with the car lights or whatever, the blinker you have on the car. So this is, if we could, and this is my answer to the labor market, if we could overcome these hurdles, yes, I would hire more people. I could employ more people. And yes, I'm paying very high salaries. We are in the IG Metall organized, and we have nobody on the low-level income rate, and we have nobody on minimum wage. We have very high-paid employees, and we would love to deliver our machines to the US. So this is what we have to look at, and I think it's not only us profiting from that by having more employment in Germany in this case, it's also the US, because then finally their cars would last longer because they would have our spark plugs, and that makes it much easier to run. So this is we have to work on the...
That's good for the US consumers.
Right. That is a profit for the consumers. Here we are. So ISO standards we would like to harmonize them, but if we just would be able to tolerate that both sides have reasonable standards and we just accept and tolerate these standards, it would help us a lot. And the same thing, I could go on, I don't want to stress my time here, with testing laboratories. We also do 50% of all prostheses, knees, hips, whatever, are done on my machines. You don't want to go through the process of the FDA. It's awful. I mean, it's awful. I can deliver easily here in Europe, and nobody dies from my prosthesis. If you go to the US, it takes you a year and a half to just be classified to be able to deliver in the health system there. So these are the reasons which I think give for the companies, and especially, as Mr. Beyrer said, for the medium and small size, because the big companies, they can afford to have this enormous lawyer stuff and consultants and whatever who go through all these papers and work that out. I can't. I have to give up. If they don't help me, if you don't come up with an agreement with Korea, also with the US, then this market is dead for me. That's how simple it is. And why is TTIP strategically important? I think generally world trade negotiations to liberalize global trade are stuck due to different reasons, and I don't want to go all into that. And I think TTIP gives a good possibility to stimulate global liberalization, and I think the growth lays outside of Europe. And if we see that and we want to grow here, we have to grow with export, and to get that export, we have to find agreements with the countries we want to deliver our goods to. So I see big opportunities there, and I think if we do this agreement now with the Americans, it can also set an example, a good example, a role model for future agreements, and especially here, where we have, let's say, friends on our other sides who share the same common ground in thinking like we do. If we can make the right role model there, it can be copied all over the world, and it would help us tremendously. If the role model becomes the agreement with Korea, we also find the nicks and dips in it, and we don't want to see that. With America, we have the real chance to make A, it's two huge markets, and B, it has the potential to really, as we start from common ground, it has the potential to really become the role model. That's our point. That's not only mine as an entrepreneur, but also the one from my association. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. There's one, you didn't mention the dispute settlement issue. Is that a deal, important for you, or is it something that you don't really care about?
Actually, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not deep in it. But if you ask me, if we can't find an agreement on that with a country sharing the same juridical codes than we do, where should we ever find it? Yes, yes, you can find reasons why somebody might sue you or not. If I understand the IDS right, then it is only if a domestic company is treated worse. Domestic company is treated better than a foreign company. No. If that is the case, then I would say it needs to be judged on, and if we find a better way than the court system in the country.
ISDS is not that. ISDS is the fact that a foreign investor would have a specific court if a problem arises, and would be different from the local the local investor.
I understand that.
But you know, when you were speaking, I was quite happy. I thought, you know, we can make a deal. You didn't mention ISDS. You mentioned non-tariff barriers. You mentioned a lot of hurdles. There are hurdles, but you know, you don't add ISDS. We don't need it. We just don't need it. And if you are dealing with IG Metall, then you want social rules to be implemented. So, you know, why not with the US?
Markus, do we need it?
Well, I think this agreement, as has been said before, I mean, this is about trade. This is about regulatory convergence if we can achieve it. And this is also about investment. And in order to generate investment, you need to protect investment. So the answer, do we need it? The answer is a clear yes. And I think the approach is too simplistic to say, let's forget about ISDS, then we have a deal. I think the question should be, let's try to do a better ISDS, because nobody says that what we are having at the time being, and by the way, which will continue to exist. We have it in 1,400 agreements, we have it in an energy charter, we have it in a number of things, and it will continue to exist, and nobody says it's perfect. There is improvements to be done in transparency. There's improvements to be done in the rules of procedure for the arbitration and so on and so on. So I think the chance we have here is to make a blueprint for a better ISDS, which would then be very beneficial for the world. But can we simply drop it? No. Because it sounds good to say, okay, now here we have 2 blocks with a developed legal system, we don't need it. Sounds good, but it's wrong. In the US, the governments are not obliged to apply the procedures and to apply the principle of non-discrimination. And this is precisely, I mean, Bernadette, you stressed, this is a positive discrimination against local companies, I mean, which is not true, because local companies don't need it, because the instrument is done to get a compensation for companies which are systematically discriminated towards local companies, and this is the truth. And therefore, I would say let's work on a better ISDS. And this brings me to the Canada thing. We all don't know precisely what is in it, beside the leaks, but I followed very closely. The Max Planck Institute made a clear assessment of the professor for international law, a clear assessment of the ISDS in CETA for the German Ministry of Economic Affairs, and comes to a very clear conclusion. That first, I mean, there's no real problem in it, and second, this is only when you shake your head, but this is the truth. This is only a possibility of last resort. I mean, first, there's a number of exemptions, carve-outs. Second, this is only after you have exhausted all possibilities in the national tribunals. And third, I mean, this is only when you have systematically discriminated a foreign investor, and therefore, I would say. Is it about hindering governments from doing what they want to do with their political will after having the mandate from the people who elected them? The answer is a clear no. But are governments to be held responsible for mistakes they make and breaches of international law if they do it in a discriminatory way? The answer is a clear yes. Because otherwise you will not generate investment because you cannot protect it.
We will talk about something other than ISDS, but let's finish this off. And Monique.
Yeah, I mentioned in the warm-up room that we should not hijack the debate with ISDS. But just to be sure, I mean, to make it sure, for us, ISDS is also a red line, that's for sure. And we believe that even if there are improvements, the system as such is too flawed to be fixed. Because the principle in itself. And we, of course, accept
you
that.
You even don't want agreements with China. I've seen it in your paper, which is, I mean... Can you
just let me finish?
Which is not feasible.
That's not really what we said, but anyway, we are not going to speak about China today. But what I wanted to say, now you cut me off in my reasoning, that's very dangerous, Markus. So we are not against...
normal your tactic, but anyway.
Yeah, we are not, of course we want investors to be protected, but what you just said a few minutes ago, go and say that to the United States, saying that they don't have an acceptable court system, I think they will rather laugh at you, and our US...
No, they have an acceptable one, but they are not obliged to apply the system of non-discrimination. which is precisely what ISDS is about. So this means they cannot provide the level of protection which is requested.
It is about discrimination because only foreign investors can use it. It's totally
No.
discrimination.
It is about discrimination because it protects foreign investors against discrimination.
No.
And of course, and local investors don't need it because normally they are not discriminated by the local government. You would agree?
Yeah. Okay. Can we move on? I would like to.
I would like to,
with a small caveat.
sorry, I would like to make two statements. I was asked, what is your position to it? I myself don't have one, but if I listen to my companies, they tell me this thing was invented to protect us, not to hurt us. And the way is it only, again, if we want to put a role model, if we really want to put a platform out there which is good for all agreements, then I think it should be in. Otherwise, it wouldn't be an achievable.
Can we move on?
Business would be protected by ISDS, but we are defending the public interest and the democratic system in our countries. So we are not just saying.
But where's the democratic system?
The democratic system have to go through the normal process, and if we cannot between two blocks like EU and US do that, then we have a serious problem. Of course, business would be more protected by an ISDS.
No, but I think I just tried to explain it. The point is, if a local government is not obliged to apply the system of non-discrimination, it cannot protect you against discrimination. In many cases, they also come to the conclusion that they
Can we move on? I think everybody's made a lot of points, and I would like to bring in the audience. And if you've got a yellow card, I should probably recognize people, but it's a bit hard to see here. So if I don't, I'll call on you. Are you a journalist? Yeah. Would you identify yourself and
it's another positive
Linné Vaudin-Dimécourt for EU Trade Insights. As a trade journalist, I go to a lot of these events on TTIP. ISDS always comes out, and it's always the same arguments, whether you're in favor of it or against it. Do you see this debate changing at any time? And do you actually listen to the other side in this debate? And one question, especially for you, Monique. You're a member of the advisory group, so you get access to a lot of negotiating documents, more than I do, so I'm quite jealous. What else do you need? Thank you.
Okay.
I thought we were going to move on from ISDS, but okay, let's not.
Should
please.
I speak about so on the advisory group? The mandate of the advisory group is to provide advice to the Commission on TTIP-related issues. First of all, the documents, there are no, the texts that are in the reading room is quite a surrealistic, again, experience, because you go there, you can only go there yourself or you alternate. You have only your pen. They give you watermarked papers. You are not allowed with your computer. You're not allowed with with your telephone. And you are supposed to read 40 pages of SBS chapter and to understand everything and to note it down. So this is not very efficient if you need to provide advice. So it's not very, it doesn't work very well. But I think that there could be some movement because we have been complaining about the practice, and maybe we could have an improvement of access of the advisory group to the documents that they are supposed to advise the Commission on. That's the first element, first shortcoming. Second, you shouldn't be jealous because it's a very frustrating experience. So second, we are supposed to advise the Commission, but what we see is that we are never being asked any advice. So, of course, sometimes we push advice because we see something, we flag something, we tell it, but then we tell it to the Commission, but we cannot even really work as a group. It's like individuals within the group that provide a comment, but it has not been discussed within the group. So the group as itself doesn't work as a group to advise. You know, we even don't try to have consensus because we really don't discuss about the topics. So, and then if a comment is being made by the member of the advisory group to the Commission, we don't know what is going to happen to that comment. So we don't receive any feedback about, yes, it's a valid or it's a stupid remark or whatever, or you're not well informed. So we believe that for the moment, this advice, and I say this, and I'm only under confidentiality rules according to content of what's in the binder. So this is just my experience, and shared maybe by other members of the group in different dimensions. But it's for the moment, let's be rude. For me, for the moment, it's just an exercise, and it's after 5 o'clock, so I'm not saying this professional, but anyway, you can quote me. It's a little bit of window dressing, and it's quite a missed opportunity of enhanced transparency.
Markus, do you want to say?
Well, would you like to go first?
Go ahead.
No, I think very briefly on the question of do we listen to each other? I think very much so, and I very closely listened to what Bernadette has said and what Monique has said, and I was very clearly also listening to the fact it's not a no, it's a yes if, because I think we all know it's good for employees at the end of the day, and it's good for consumers under certain conditions. I would agree. But looking to the things we have been discussing, I mean, public services. Well, I think we are not pushing for privatizing public services, and this is not what is the negotiations for the time being. On the jobs, I think we had very good examples from Mr. Welker, who really brought you a good example of quality jobs which can be created. On the precautionary principle, I mean, I think this is a debate we have to have in Europe. I think nobody questions the precautionary principle, but we will have to overcome the perversion of the precautionary principle, because as we see it, and this has nothing to do with TTIP, as we see it, the precautionary principle is about controlling risks, assessing risks, managing risks, but it's not about excluding all risks as ante, which in some kinds it is misunderstood, and this is the end of progress, and this is what we need to overcome. If you listen to Mr. Gabriel today, to cite a German social democrat, I mean, he is addressing this with 6 points to say we need to overcome this fear aspect in public perception, and we need to overcome this technology adversity, because otherwise, I mean, there's not many possibilities we have in Europe in a shrinking society than innovation. So we must not stop innovation, but we agree we must assess risks. One sentence on the ISDS, do we listen to each other? And you're right, I mean, the arguments are very often similar. And I think we very much listen to each other, at least I do. And I say we are very much ready to improve the instrument. But do we listen to the argument to say we cannot have any kind of ISDS because this is the end of democracy? No, I don't listen, because this is simply wrong.
Yeah, well, we do listen to each other. If we didn't, I wouldn't be sitting with Markus and the other speakers here. We do, but there are red lines. And, you know, in the EU, we have, in the opinion of the European Trade Union Movement, a problem of democracy. And this problem of democratic process has been crystallizing on the ISDS. And I tell you, there is no way I can, as a European trade union leader, go and convince people who see the ISDS as a protection for companies, and when they have no protection from the EU. So that is a red line. And, you know, I can have 2 hours conversation with Markus, or 3, probably more, and I'm not saying I know everything about the ISDS, but this has become a problem of why is it that companies have different rules from elsewhere than in the EU? And I think normal people don't have the answer. So, you know, that is a very, very much a red line. And I have said at the beginning, it's growing. It's growing in the ETUC. It's getting stronger, and we are a very democratic organization. And at some stage, you know, instead of saying perhaps if and yes if, you know, then things might change.
Thank you. You had a question?
Yes, Daniela Vincenti from Iran. It seems to me that...
Sorry, wait for the microphone.
It seems to me that we need an arbiter here. And as much as you try, Stephen, I don't think you are in the right position. But we are ending a cycle, and we're starting a new cycle, institutional cycle. So I wonder if all the problems we have encountered are not because you're all basically saying that the Commission has mismanaged one way or the other. The access to documents, the access to also positions. So do you think the new commissioner will be a better one? And also, it's not just at European level. There are also things happening on the other side of the Atlantic with midterm elections. What do you think what kind of impact is going to have on this discussion? Better or worse?
Anyone want to take that quite speculative
it's very,
I
the answer is
also-
quite difficult. Mrs. Malmström comes from Sweden. Sweden is a country which is very open to TTIP. But I have to tell you that the Swedish trade unions, which are full members of the ETUC, are following the line that I have expressed. Now, whether Mrs. Malmström will be listening more than Mr. de Geert, give her a chance. That's what I would say. I would give her a chance, yes.
I think it's not for us to judge about whether they will be better or so. Well, was the start on the public debate a very good one? I think the answer is a clear no. We all know this. But on the other hand, I think we have to acknowledge, and I think also Monique said it. I mean, this is, on the contrary, this is the most transparent agreement we ever had. I mean, there's a number of consultations. We have this advisory group, which might be improved. I would not even disagree. But we have to acknowledge that we have more than we ever had. And of course, there's also a learning curve. So is the change of institutions a chance to translate these attempts? And you will have seen this procedure which is launched by the ombudsman or the ombudswoman. But I think also there, it is clearly said that a lot of attempts are made and more is done than has ever been done for an agreement. So is this a chance to relaunch it in a way to say, let's demonstrate more what is done and what can we do even better? I would say yes. Was it? But this doesn't mean that they haven't done it well before, because I think nobody expected this debate. And of course, once the debate is started, it's very difficult to control. But I think the efforts have been there, and the attempts have been there. And was it realistic to do it on one tank of gas? Well, apparently not. Will the next year be the decisive one? Well, I think so. After the midterm and after the new institutions being fully in place and in power on European level, I think we have a little chance to make progress. And once again, I think we need to seize this opportunity.
And can I agree really with what has been said before, and I also would like to stress that Mr. Juncker himself has been quite outspoken about the need for more transparency. So I think the direction is given, and I think that DG Trade, the officials have really tried very hard, but they didn't have the tools. It was a little bit like there has been no precedent, what should we do? And then it was a little bit like reacting on the spot to demands. But there was no vision about transparency, so there should be a little bit also for the future trade agreements. So, like, what's the strategy of transparency? Not like on the spot reacting to, we would like a stakeholder meeting. Yes, we will have a stakeholder meeting. An advisory group. Yes, an advisory group. So that would be. I'm also quite optimistic that there is a fresh start in the way the approach to the negotiations.
Any more questions from any reporters? Yes.
Jarno Hartikainen, Finnish Business Daily Kauppalehti. We've heard that the unions and the consumer groups have their red lines on TTIP. So I would pose my question on Mr. Beyrer. Do you have red lines on TTIP? I mean, I'm thinking of public procurement in the US, for example, which is, you know, one of the main goals of EU is to open up the competition for European companies. If this wouldn't be included in the deal, would you still be able to accept it?
Well, I think this is a little bit too early to say, and I rather talk about ambitions and negotiating positions than about red lines, because I think, I mean, we have seen what happened in the German trade unions, which I think is a positive approach, which in a way means that they want to have a constructive approach towards TTIP, and they have 14 points. So, well, I mean, if everybody has 14 points and each of these points is a conditio sine qua non, we might have problems in negotiating. But of course, we have clear ambitions. We want to reduce the tariffs to zero. We are not there. We don't even have the offer we would expect. We want to have services on the base of a negative list. We are not there. On public procurement, you're very clear. We always said to our friends on the US side, we will need clear progress in public procurement on federal and also on sub-federal level in order to make this a success in Europe. This will be very difficult. But I think there is aspects which can give hope in the Canada agreement. And again, I mean, I'm very surprised about the debate we're having in Europe. I think the US negotiators are much more preoccupied on what might be in the Canada agreement than we should be in Europe. But the very unhelpful debate we're having in Europe, I don't hear any debate in the US. So sometimes I'm not so sure whether our way of acting in these stories is so smart. But public procurement, I mean, the Jones Act, I mean, you learn a lot in these negotiations, and I learned that this is, I think, from the 20s and has been designed in order to allow the US to build up a decent fleet. Well, you could come to the opinion that this was successful. So, and this now you could do a little differently, and you could also come to the opinion that parts of these fleets are less competitive than they could be because they have been protected. So our approach is, of course, they should be opened up. But do I talk about red lines? No, because I think what we need to see is a negotiation where we have many aspects on the table and where we are able to make also creative solutions, because this is what this agreement is all about. We are talking about negotiation between two blocs, which so far were used to impose the view on the others. And this goes for the US, and this certainly also goes for the European Union. So this time we will have to be creative. So do we have a long list of ambitions? Yes. And it's longer than what I was stating here. But I rather don't talk about red lines, because we will have to judge on the overall package.
What about Buy America provisions? And is this
well, this is something we would like to disappear on both sides of the Atlantic, very clearly.
But that's the federal government, which is negotiating this, is not in a position to order states, though.
Well, this is, of course, a challenge, but this is something where we will expect our friends on the other side of the Atlantic to find a solution, like the Canadians did. Apparently.
Can I just add something
there?
Because sometimes you have a vision about the United States being the United States, but in fact they have a much less single market within their territory than we have in terms of differences in legislation. So states have quite a big regulatory power there, and that means that the business industry that wants to import into the United States has to comply still with those rules. So TTIP will not be the solution to all those difficulties.
And I guess the other issue is if we're dealing with regulation, the federal agencies have a significant autonomy to behave in ways that the federal government may not. It has limited power in that area. Yes, please.
Hey, thank you. Craig Willey, German Press Agency. I thought it was very interesting because the debate isn't as black and white in the sense that we have slightly nuanced commentators. And I was quite intrigued by the point on technical barriers versus societal choices. Has work been done either between you and between all the associations here to determine what are the really legitimate technical barriers to be dismantled and what are issues which are left up to countries to decide how their society is? And second, has there been analysis of what the Commission has presented so far as to whether they're going beyond technical barriers to societal choices? I'm saying this also because we've heard a lot about ISDS, we always hear a lot about ISDS, but we don't hear much about the rest, and it tends to be, well, we don't know yet, but they have presented a few position papers, so I was wondering if I got a comment on that. Thank you.
Bernadette, you want to take that first?
Well, maybe I would say a technical barrier, which might be interpreted as just technical, would be some points on health. For instance, for us, of course, the limit between what is technical and what is not is it's very difficult, and we are very keen to keep very high health standards. That is, you could have also very technical things which are protective of people. I remember I used to be involved in discussion in private security sector, where we had discussion on how strong should the bulletproof thing of a driver should be. Now, where is it technical and where is it protecting people? But more generally, we think, and we are convinced that never could you interpret the collective agreements, for instance, and the protection that collective agreement give as a technical barrier. And we don't know what is done. I don't, at least. I don't know what sort of technicalities are at stake. Now, the examples that were given here, at first sight, I don't have any problem, but we are very cautious about that.
Sorry, I'm bringing Carl.
Sorry, of course.
I think there is no straight line, and there has to be trust. I'm married with an American, and I lived there for quite a while. When I visited my cousin last year, or at the very beginning of this year, actually, he asked me a million questions about, is it true that the French cheese is really produced the way it is and that it carries a million of bacteria with it? And if that, you go into this discussion and you say, where does he get the information? And finally I told him, look, I love it, and it would help your country if you might even lose weight in the Midwest if you use it. But they are really concerned about it. They think our quality standards and our food standards and our health standards are not up to what they need. And I can say for both sides, I mean, there is no, if we don't trust America and America doesn't trust Europe and we give it a little freedom, we will never examine where the line is and what could be bad or good. We have to take the trust that when we accept the other one's rules, that they're pretty high standards. I mean, the people dying in America is rather limited, and in Europe too. So I completely trusted, dropped that subject, and this is so frustrating because if I listen to it as a consumer and as an entrepreneur, I have the feeling, what are they discussing in Brussels? These are not the subjects we have, sorry. I mean, nobody died from French cheese, and nobody died from chlorine chicken, and this is ridiculous. We have to go to the point and say we want that free market, and we want that free market to be a model, and we want to get employment higher than it is right now here in Europe, and we need the Americas for that, and that is all forgotten. Now we talk about the suing American company, and we're talking about the things we have to protect our market for. I'm afraid we get lost in it. We can make free trade agreements with all the other countries, which are so far away in standards and whatever from us. And now there comes the one who is the most similar, and we fall over our feet because here is an endless discussion about things which are absolutely, worthless to be discussed.
No, keep it to a trade agreement and it will be very fine.
First mention there, by the way, I just wanted to flag the chlorine chicken mentioned for the first time in the debate.
I won't speak.
I take it back. I stay with the French cheese. Sorry.
Go ahead. I promise I won't speak about chlorine chicken. I could speak for hours on chlorine chicken. But to be fair, French cheese has killed people because French cheese. No, I mean, just to be fair.
Okay, I sent you to my cousin.
No, but I mean, just to be fair, no, you just have to know it because listeria develop in non-pasteurized cheese. So it's just you have to know it. But that's a very good example about differences in culture. In the United States, they hate nature. Not that they hate nature, but they are not really trusting biological agents.
No, they love processed food.
They love chemicals. They have faith. They have trust in chemical treatments. In Europe, it's the other way around. And I don't say we like organic and we hate chemicals. It's not one is better than the other. It's just different approaches to life. to the world. And this is because you spoke about technical barriers versus societal. This is the thing. It's about consumer preferences. It's not the discussion about the food differences. It's not necessarily only about safety. It's about what are consumer preferences. For example, in Europe, and now maybe I'm going to stress some of you, consumers don't want GMO in their food. Many consumers, the majority of consumers. Some don't care. We are not, as BEUC, we are not saying that GMO food is unsafe. But we say that consumers should be able to choose according to their preference. That means GMO labeling. Well, GMO labeling is not there in the United States. That's what we are fighting for, that consumers who would like not to eat GMO processed or containing food should have the information, the necessary information.
And
to
TTIP is not stopping that.
It
can be labeled anyway.
It
can be labeled in Europe all over the place.
Yes, but
TTIP is not stopping that.
What do you know? Do you have the text? Because the point is that one of the risks is that if you go into whatever regulatory cooperation, products that would be processed and labeled according to the home rules in the United States should be importable into Europe. And that's the point. And the US is dead against GMO labeling because they don't have the traceability. They don't know. And that's the point. So that means that we should then, at the end of the day, not have a sufficient information system in Europe just because the United States don't have GMO labeling. That's the risk. I don't say that it's going to happen, but I want to be reassured. And it's not because somebody in DG Trade says me, trust us, it won't happen, that I believe them.
Bernadette, quick
I'm not going to speak about chicken or camembert. Something I should have said immediately, replying to your question. We have in Europe standards, chemical standards, which have been approved through the REACH directive. That is a very clear limit between standards and protection, and we want to keep REACH. That's all I wanted to say. It should have been my first answer.
Markus.
Well, very briefly in REACH, I didn't want to talk about REACH, but I think, well, there's certainly possibilities to improve REACH, but let me be very clear on this, and it's a pity that our colleague from BASF is not here. I mean, the same goes for European companies. I mean, they have invested a lot in complying with REACH. Of course, there's necessities to improve REACH, but I can assure you the companies concerned, they don't want to just get rid of it, because they also see it as a comparable advantage, and others will also have to invest. So this is, of course, something we need to improve. I know that's entailing excessive costs, but I mean, of course, our friends from BASF would have been better placed to defend this. But on the overall debate on the standards, I think we had a much too generalistic approach to this, because and well, Monique, you said somebody in the DG Trade. I think on the GMOs it was the responsible commissioner. So normally I would trust him if he says standards on GMOs would not be watered down. But anyhow,
I speak about labeling, not on standards.
Yeah, but has been a clear statement. So we won't have a problem on GMOs apparently, but we'll see. But I think most important is, I mean, we have to go step by step. Of course, we have a lot to gain in the regulatory convergence and also coherence, because one thing is it's about eliminating costly, unnecessary duplications. It's not about lowering standards, and I think this has been very clearly said on both sides of the Atlantic. It's about eliminating costly, unnecessary duplications. And of course, this is a hell of a work. I mean, there's work done in the sectors, there's work done on the horizontal level, there is different possibilities. There is mutual recognition, what has been stressed, but I mean, of course, this will not happen like this, because at the end of the day, it's also about political choices. So what do I mean? If we come to the assessment that, let's say, brakes for cars provide the same level of safety, I don't know, I'm not a negotiator there, and if we come to this assessment, they have the same level of motivation and assessment, then we could come to the recognition that either we recognize each other's standards, or if we don't recognize each other's standards, at least we say the same method of testing should be appraised. All this is reducing unnecessary costs in this way. But this would, of course, not mean that the whole car would be mutually recognized. If we have different standards on CO2, which is a discretionary political decision, this would prevail. So we have to go step by step through these things, but there's so many things we could do without lowering standards improving the situation and going step by step and making the access to business for companies, specifically for SMEs, less costly, and therefore creating major opportunities. And for the future, I mean, I know you have talked about this as well. For the future, of course, we need to come to a system where the regulators talk to each other, keep each other informed. This doesn't mean that this would circumvent decision making, because of course the decisions would stay with those who are legitimized to do it. But of course we should have the aim that our markets are not further drifting apart, but on the contrary, ab initio, avoid to have unnecessary, costly duplications. And this is what it's all about.
I can broaden the discussion now to, I mean, any reporter who wants to ask a question, please do. But the rest of you have been sitting quietly. If you have anything, any questions or anything more to say, please do. Now's your opportunity. Any questions at all from the audience in general? I've got a question in the absence of that. Which relates to something that Bernadette mentioned earlier, which is a kind of a narrow agreement, one that sort of basically is achievable, one that you can kind of get hold of now and get the good bits out of, and then the possibility of kind of a longer term kind of negotiation to kind of add more bits on. I mean, is this a possibility in this case? Is this, practical? Is it is it an outcome that you think would be desirable?
Should I start?
Yeah.
Well, certainly it would be better than having a bad general agreement with everything we don't like. So, if it is a question of narrowing the agreement and getting something good and gradual, well, why not? Yes, I would say it would be a better solution than failing altogether.
What do you think?
Well, first, we should not fail. Second, I mean, this is a lot about this debate of the low-hanging fruits. So I don't think there's so many low-hanging fruits left, because otherwise, in the relationship we have, we would have done it since a long time. So I believe we need to have an ambitious approach in order to have a number of aspects on the table, in order to be able to come to creative solutions, as I said previously, because this is not just one more agreement. Insofar, I agree with Monique. This is the agreement. I mean, this is the biggest step we can make in bilateral trade and investment, and therefore we'll need to combine all the assets we have at the table to have also big ambition on the scope, and in order to be able to do the creative deals, the innovative deals we will need to make this agreement an success.
Martin, do you have a view on it?
Yeah, I would say it's Obama put that possibility on the table, and I think we should take it. I can live with something less, but I think at the end we should find together that free trade and all what is behind is, so far we look in history, raising the wealth of all people involved, and that is what we have to go back and look at it from a bird perspective. And I say take as much as you can, and hopefully make it successful.
Well, yes, I agree with Bernadette, and because of course it would be better to have a good agreement with a broader scope and ambitious scope, but I think that realistically, given the steps, the delays that are already now taking place with the negotiation rounds, and we know that it has to be finalized by the end of next year, after that it's dead. So I think it would be maybe more realistic to have a narrow scope and to have a success on that scope rather than to have it dead at the end of next year.
And no, free trade is not benefiting everybody. No. Inequalities have increased in the world, and free trade is not benefiting everybody at the same level. That is not something I can agree with.
But I guess globalization happened.
Yeah, but at the expense of some. I mean.
Yeah, but if you look at this total number of the 8 billion people populating this earth, and you look into China, how many made enormous progress in their wealth. Yes, you can count the maybe 50 million who didn't make it in Europe as good as they wanted, but compared to the 300 or 500 million in Asia, it's still...
I propose another discussion
on globalization.
organized by ETUC on free trade.
Please.
Luisa Santos, Business Europe. I would like to put a question because you mentioned, particularly you, Bernadette, you mentioned having a narrower scope in the agreement, and at the beginning, both you and Monique mentioned that keep it to a trade agreement and kick out other aspects of the agreement. Now, one of the, sorry, then I misunderstood you, but one of the aspects of this agreement that is not normally included in a trade agreement, at least not included by everyone, it is included by the EU and the US, is the so-called sustainability chapter, where you have the environment and the social standards. So my question to you, I mean, if you want to keep it as a traditional trade agreement, this would not be included. So my question to you is, do you prefer to have a trade agreement, a traditional one, like everyone else is doing, not the EU, but other trade partners, China, India, that there's no sustainability chapter, or you prefer to have a free trade agreement including a sustainability chapter?
Well, first of all, this possibility of having a restricted agreement was not started by me. It was in the discussion I had with Carlo Calenda, the Deputy Trade Minister from Italy, and also with Bernd Lange. Now, I don't think that the Indian or whatever other agreement are just simple agreements. Why are you saying that? I mean, it's they are not. They are trade agreements. The agreement with Korea is a trade agreement which has a social chapter. So we are not going.
I'm not talking about the EU agreements. I'm talking about the EU and the US are the only trade partners in the world that include a sustainability chapter in their trade agreements.
No.
No, do you prefer to have this option, or do you prefer, like all the other countries are doing?
I'm sorry. In the EU Korea agreement, we have a chapter on social standards, and these social standards are followed by a committee for their implementation. Now, it's not fantastic. I'm not saying it's fantastic, but we have that in other agreements. So why not in the EU-US?
I think the point was, if I may,
then I don't understand. Maybe it's very possible.
Sorry, the point was that the agreements not involving the US and not involving the EU, in other words, by third countries, don't include. Would you prefer a pure trade agreement along those lines rather than one that includes these broader issues?
No, I want to include the broader issues. That's very clear. The social line is very important.
And just
to
for the misunderstanding,
Sorry,
if ever, I mean, what I said is that as it is more than a trade agreement, why not having more than a trade agreement to be discussed, but then not according to trade agreement rules, but to more inclusive rules that provide for more democratic control. Otherwise, yeah, so then well, it's not a trade agreement, it's much bigger than a trade agreement.
It's a trade and investment agreement with a lot of other aspects, but I don't see the lack of democratic control. I mean, this is negotiated on the basis of the mandate according to the treaties. The mandate has been decided by the member states. Now the Commission is negotiating it. People are kept not enough, as you're saying, but all the constituencies are kept more informed than they normally have ever been in any previous agreements. And at the end, I mean, the Parliament will have to vote it, and the Council have to decide. And very probably, I mean, we'll see up to the extent also the national governments, so national parliament. So I don't see the lack of democracy.
Well, look at how a regulation or a directive is being adopted within the EU. It is being discussed by the Parliament. There are amendments. Here,
but then you say our overall system is not democratic, but this is a different problem.
No, what I say here is that there is a difference between when you make EU law or when you make a trade agreement. A trade agreement, the Parliament has a yes or no possibility. And this is not a democratic control because there will be so much pressure.
This is what the treaty says.
Sorry?
This is what the treaty says.
I didn't. Yes, but still, we believe that as this is more than just trade in the traditional sense of the word, we believe that there should be a much more inclusive debate with those who are concerned by the regulatory changes that are going to happen via TTIP.
And I would agree that we should include as many people possible. So far, I think we're on the same page. Sorry, Bernadette, because this is a very important point. But you also said it previously. You were talking about the elected representatives and the citizens. So, of course, we have to include the citizens as well, but this is not the same. So, we talk about how do we deal with these things. Do we deal with it on the basis of the representative democracy, or also, or only on the basis of stakeholder involvement. We are totally ready to, and as you know, because we're working in this direction together, to involve the stakeholders. But I think at the end of the day, the decisions have to be taken by those who have been appointed via the representative democracy.
Yeah. I agree with you, Markus. I think in the end, the final test will be the various parliaments. In the end, the final test will be the various parliaments. But if you don't have the input of the stakeholders during the negotiation, then it will fail. Today, I was given this information coming from Deutsche Welle. Germany puts CETA free trade deal with Canada on hold. Okay. I suppose it's true. Deutsche Welle must have the right information. So, I mean, this is a democratic system that will be operational if the stakeholders are not listened to. And you're right, in the end, it will be the parliaments. I agree with you on that.
Well, in the end, it will be the parliaments, and we will have to say, I mean, because the CETA agreement is concluded, and
it's
now
not signed.
It's not signed. It will not even be initialed. Exactly. But I think everybody will have to have a close look on what is in once it is published. But also on the German situation, it was very interesting to see this study of the Max Planck Institute, and I rather judge on what government officials and these bodies say. I don't judge on party conventions, because normally you have different rules on this. And I think there's a lot in it. And once again, I think we are not very wise, because we have a very difficult debate on the Canada thing in Europe, whereas I think the US negotiators should have much more to worry about in this agreement than the European side would do. So this is not really strengthening our position in the TTIP negotiation, and it's not a very smart approach.
I think you should, for a probably more rounded view of the Canadian negotiations, read the Wall Street Journal of get my advertisement in. We had quite a nice story about this this morning. Please. We're getting towards the end.
Good story as well.
Thank you. This is Elizabeth from the European Consumer Organization. I just wanted to ask the business representatives whether they see a need for more transparency in the TTIP negotiations or not, and why. Thank you.
Do I start or you start?
You know, I get what I get from the newspaper, and what our concerns are regarding from the association being involved. We do not have, talking for the engineering association, we do not have the feeling that we are not enough involved. We do have the feeling that the American side has a very tough, hard time to define who is our correspondent partner in negotiation, the details for what our interests are. Do we belong to the automotive? No, we don't. Do we belong to general industry? No, we don't. We are machine tool sector. So where do they put us? They don't have something similar in their organization world there. So it's a little bit difficult for us. But I think it's up to the Brussels community to decide if they feel uninformed or not. And obviously, there are some concerns that these things are not opened up enough. I get the feeling it is a relatively, I've never seen and never heard that any trade negotiation was discussed in the public as much as this one is. And I'm surprised that, especially here, everybody has the feeling we are not informed. As I open the newspaper, and there's actually every day something in it. If I look at the Korean agreement, which might be much more scary when I look at Korea and the automotive sector there, nobody talked about it. I mean, really nobody. So I'm not really sure if my perspective might be wrong, but I think to be honest, and that might not really fit in this round, I have a lot of feeling there is, and it came across, especially when we had this NSA thing. It then fell down after we found out that we spy as much on them than they do on us. But as long as that came up, you had the feeling, I mean, this TTIP thing is the worst thing which can happen to us, you know. And I had the feeling it has a lot to do with we are very skeptical about our partner overseas. And I think all this skepticism is put into this agreement. And I think we have to step back a little bit and say this is not the political discussion about Guantanamo, and it's not about Syria, and I don't know what. It's a free trade agreement or a trade agreement and an investment agreement. And if we can put it down to this and really look at with less emotion to it, I feel, I mean, we as our branch feel well informed, but I learned here, and I can share that the ones who are involved in the process don't get the papers, then obviously there's something wrong here, and that should be healed. And I don't think it's too difficult to heal. Let me say this: somebody said when you play poker, you don't put your cards on the table. Yes, and I think the Parliament has to play a little poker. If we in a negotiation phase where we are with the Americans, where we want them to open much more, partially from their point of view, much more than we open to them, to say we put that all on the table openly because we discussed it in widespread, I don't think that works. I think there will be negotiations behind closed doors, and otherwise you will never get a reasonable agreement done, or at least you don't get the other side to move into your direction if you show all your cards up front. That's my opinion, and therefore I think there will be always a part which is not published in the newspaper, hopefully, because that will be the part which brings us further.
Markus, you...
So, well, as we have both been addressed very briefly, I mean, number one, could the start have been better for many reasons? I think the answer is a clear yes. Number two, and I think we were agreeing on this podium, this is the agreement with the most efforts made on transparency ever, so I think we should acknowledge this. Is there room for improvement? Yes. But can everything be made public all the time? The answer is a clear no, because all negotiations need to involve a certain level of secrecy. This is relevant for all negotiations. And this is also relevant for negotiations in private. If you want to sell your car and you're ready to sell it within a margin of 15,000 to 20,000 euros, and if the persons you talk to know it, I mean, then you're pretty sure that you will not get more than 15,000 and not closest to 20 what you would normally like to. So maybe this is a little too simplistic, but so is there margin for improvement? And I think, and Monique said it, the new president of the Commission was underlining this. But will there remain a certain and necessary level of secrecy? Of course, because this is what negotiations are very often also about, because otherwise you don't come to a decent result.
Monique?
I agree that there are parts that are trade-offs, you know, like certainly on the tariff part, and that's maybe something. But I think that there are some of the chapters that are so important for society that they really would deserve much more openness.
Yeah,
and
the rules are the same for these parts.
Well, I mean, you say that we should be creative, so let's adapt the rules to when, if you want this to be...
We cannot adapt the treaty here, I mean...
You can still, I mean, those who can do less can do more, you know? You're not obliged to, but you can do better. And so I don't even ask for the public in general to have this access. I mean, normally, officially, I would do, but I would still already find it a very good improvement if the Parliament itself, on those chapters with societal impact, if I can say it in that way, would have a meaningful input and not just an information and a reading room. In the Parliament, they are even not allowed to take notes. So it's even worse than the advisory group. So that would be really steps in the right direction, where then there could be reassurance about what's happening there. On those chapters where it shouldn't be a poker game, because it's not selling a car. It can be, potentially, and that's what we don't know, that's why we are so afraid, it can be giving away some of the right to regulate. And that's something that we don't want in the area that are relevant for consumer policy.
Nobody's giving away a right to regulate. I mean, this is not even part of the mandate, so I don't know where this comes from.
Okay. But do you want the last word, or shall I just, because we're running pretty close to time?
I leave it to you because trade unions know how to negotiate.
Behind
Maybe
closed doors.
I should be involved.
Behind closed doors, you know that.
Yeah, more transparency in trade union negotiations. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming along. It's been a good debate, I think. I wonder, there is a difference between running into the sand and running into the wall. And I guess running into the sand is just a slower process.
And less dangerous.
And less dangerous,
Let's build it on rock.
So thank you to the panelists. Thank you to everyone who came. There are drinks over there. You're probably dying for one by now. Yeah, thank you all and good night.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you. I agree with you on the color.